What if the first breath of intelligent life in our solar system was not drawn here, on this vibrant blue marble, but was exhaled long ago on a world that is now silent and red? What if our history, our very existence, is not a singular genesis, but merely the second draft of a cosmic story, whose first forgotten verse was written in dust? This is not a question of distant aliens or strange invaders, but of something far more intimate: ancestry. It is the unnerving and quiet possibility that the silence we hear from Mars is not the sound of an empty, lifeless world, but the fading resonance of a symphony that ended billions of years before our own had even begun. It asks us to look at those rust-colored canyons and endless plains not as scars of geology, but as the faded, unreadable lines on the palm of a long-dead cosmic sibling. This gentle inquiry into the unknown is the journey we take here, exploring the quietest corners of possibility. If you find yourself drawn to these deep, contemplative mysteries, and you enjoy following the faint echoes of what might have been, consider subscribing to our channel to continue these explorations with us. The question of a lost Martian civilization forces us to reconsider our place in the cosmos. It suggests that perhaps we are not the dawn of consciousness in the solar system, but the afternoon, living under a sun that has already witnessed another world awaken, and then fall into a deep, unending sleep. We search the stars for neighbors, but what if the most profound connection we could ever have is with a neighbor who is no longer there to answer? We have been trained to see Mars through a specific lens, a filter of our own experience. To us, it is a magnificent ruin, a testament to planetary failure, a world that lost its chance at life before it could truly begin. Our rovers and orbiters map its dry riverbeds and vast empty deltas as evidence of a past where only the simplest microbial life might have existed. Philosophers and poets use it as a metaphor for loneliness and decay, a beautiful, stark warning of our own potential fate. But what if this interpretation is fundamentally incomplete? What if our search for cities of metal and bone has blinded us to the signs of a life that built its monuments out of time and gravity itself, leaving a legacy we are not yet equipped to recognize? Let us drift back across an ocean of time, 3.8 billion years into the past, to the late Noachian period on Mars. This is not the frozen, desiccated planet we know today. A thin, carbon dioxide-rich atmosphere clings to the world, creating a weak greenhouse effect that allows for the impossible: liquid water. The sun, a younger and dimmer star, casts a soft, perpetual twilight across the landscape. The sky is not blue, but a pale, hazy butterscotch, and shallow, rust-colored oceans lap gently against the shores of vast, crater-pocked continents. Under this faint, ancient light, the planet is alive. It is a world on the precipice, holding a fragile and temporary warmth against the encroaching, inevitable cold of deep space. A fleeting moment of sanctuary in a violent, young solar system. On this ancient Mars, life did not evolve toward technology, but toward geology. Imagine a civilization of lithosentience, beings whose consciousness was not contained in a fragile body, but was deeply intertwined with the planet's very crust and its weak, flickering magnetic field. They did not build cities of metal and glass that could crumble to dust. Instead, they sang resonant frequencies into the rock, patiently sculpting canyons over millennia, or coaxing mineral veins into crystalline patterns that stored memory like a silent library. Their existence was a slow, contemplative dance with the planet itself. They measured time not in the passing of days, but in the steady decay of isotopes and the slow, graceful wobble of their world's axis. Their culture was patience. Their art was the landscape. Meanwhile, on a still volatile Earth, life was a chaotic and violent experiment, a world away in temperament and evolution. Here, in a primordial, volcanic soup, nothing more than single-celled organisms thrived, locked in a brutal, microscopic struggle for survival. Our planet was a screaming infant, unaware of the silent, thinking world next door. The normalcy of that distant era was a quiet, planetary-scale consciousness, a life form living in perfect, silent harmony with its world, a state of being so profound and so alien to our own experience that we lack the language to truly describe it. The greatest mystery, then, is not whether this world existed, but what could have possibly silenced such a deep and pervasive song, leaving only a red ghost in its wake. Our modern understanding of Mars is a story written by robots. We send our metallic emissaries, Curiosity, Perseverance, Spirit, to be our eyes and hands on that distant, silent world. They dutifully scrape at the red soil, analyze the thin air, and drill into ancient rock, searching for the faintest whispers of life. But the life they seek is humble, microscopic, a ghost of biology confined to the bottom of a long, dry lakebed. The scientific consensus paints a portrait of a planet that almost was, a world that held the ingredients for life but lost the recipe before it could create a masterpiece. We celebrate the discovery of organic molecules not as a sign of past civilization, but as a hopeful hint that bacteria may have once swum in its now vanished waters. This is the limit of our accepted ambition, the boundary of our scientific dream for Mars. The evidence for this watery past is etched into the very face of the planet, a beautiful and tragic map of what has been lost. Orbiters have traced the ghostly outlines of vast river deltas, like the one in Jezero Crater, where water once flowed with enough force to carry sediment for miles, building new land. We see the meandering paths of ancient riverbeds, now just dry, winding canyons snaking across the plains. We have found minerals like hematite spherules, nicknamed blueberries, and layers of gypsum, which on Earth only form in the presence of standing water. The polar ice caps, a mix of water ice and frozen carbon dioxide, are the last visible remnants of a once abundant hydrosphere. These are not theories, they are facts, the undeniable fingerprints left by oceans and rivers on a world that has long since forgotten the feeling of rain. The scientific narrative for this planetary death is both elegant and brutal. It is a story about a fading heartbeat. Billions of years ago, the molten iron core of Mars, the engine that generated its protective magnetic field, began to cool and solidify. Without this invisible shield, the planet was left defenseless against the solar wind. A constant stream of charged particles from the sun, this cosmic radiation began to strip the Martian atmosphere away, molecule by molecule, like a thief stealing a blanket in the dead of night. As the atmospheric pressure dropped, the oceans literally boiled away into the vacuum of space. It was not a sudden cataclysm, but a slow, inexorable decline, a planetary fading that spanned millions of years, turning a gentle, water-rich world into the frozen desert we see today. This timeline is the greatest accomplice to the mystery. The Great Fading happened over 3.5 billion years ago, an expanse of time so vast it defies human intuition. Imagine every empire that has ever risen and fallen on Earth, every mountain range that has been pushed up and eroded away, every species that has evolved and gone extinct, and multiply that history by 1,000. On Mars, eons of relentless solar radiation have sterilized the surface, breaking down complex molecules. Global dust storms, some lasting for months, have scoured the landscape and buried it under layers of fine red sand, smoothing over any delicate features. Countless asteroid and comet impacts have fractured the crust, erasing old surfaces and creating new ones. Time, on a planetary scale, is not a gentle river. It is a grinding, pulverizing force that turns history into dust. Our search, therefore, is filtered through an unavoidably human lens. We are looking for ourselves in the Martian dust. We search for ruins that resemble our own, cities with right angles, tools carved from stone or forged from metal, fossils with recognizable skeletons. Our definition of civilization is built upon our own technological and biological trajectory. We are looking for the familiar echoes of our own story. But what if intelligence can take a form so alien to our own experience that we would not recognize its signature even if we were standing right on top of it? What if a civilization's monuments were not built to be seen but to be felt, or to be heard only in the language of mathematics and resonance? Our search criteria may be the very thing that is blinding us to the truth. This brings the famous Fermi paradox much closer to home. We scan distant star systems, listening for intelligent radio signals, asking, where is everybody? Yet we have a world next door that is profoundly and utterly silent. Perhaps that silence is not an absence of an answer, but the answer itself. The great filter, the theoretical barrier that prevents life from becoming interstellar, might not be a future test we have yet to face, but a past event that has already played out in our own cosmic backyard. The quiet of Mars could be the most important signal we ever receive, a message not of greeting, but of remembrance. It suggests that the cosmos may indeed create life and intelligence, but that it is just as efficient at taking it away, leaving behind only the quiet hum of background radiation and rust. Science offers a tantalizing and unsettling alternative to this cosmic loneliness: the theory of panspermia. This is the hypothesis that life can travel between planets, carried within the shelter of meteorites blasted into space by ancient asteroid impacts. We typically imagine this as a one-way street, with life arriving on a young Earth from somewhere else. But what if the traffic was going the other way? What if life first sparked on the gentler, water-rich Mars, and then, as that world began to die, a cataclysmic impact launched Martian rocks, carrying the first simple organisms toward a younger, more volatile, but ultimately more stable Earth? In this scenario, we are not Earthlings in the truest sense. We are the descendants of a microbial diaspora. We are, in a very real way, Martians. This deep, subtle possibility stands in stark contrast to the more sensationalized visions of Martian history. For decades, popular culture has been fascinated by anomalies like the face on Mars in the Cydonia region, a rock formation that, in a low-resolution 1976 photograph, resembled a human face. Higher-resolution images later revealed it to be a simple mesa, a trick of light and shadow. This is a classic example of pareidolia, the human brain's tendency to see patterns, especially faces, in random arrangements. While these ideas spark the imagination, they also distract from the deeper mystery. The evidence of a lost Martian civilization is likely not sitting on the surface, waiting to be photographed. It would be hidden far deeper, written in a language of geology, physics, and time itself. To find it, we must first reconsider the very nature of consciousness. Must intelligence always lead to technology, to cities, to radio waves? Could a mind exist without a brain? A civilization without a body? Imagine a form of life that did not evolve to manipulate its environment, but to become one with it. A consciousness distributed through the crystalline structures of rock, communicating through seismic vibrations, experiencing time on a geological scale. For such a being, a single thought might last 1,000 years. Its society would not be a collection of individuals, but a planetary network, a single, thinking world. Its legacy would not be a library of books, but a planet whose very canyons and mountains were arranged with deliberate, subtle intent. What evidence would such a civilization leave behind? Not a broken pot or a crumbling wall. Instead, we might find a vast deposit of minerals whose isotopic ratios are mathematically impossible to explain through natural processes. Or we could detect a persistent, ultra-low-frequency magnetic anomaly deep within the crust, a resonance that pulses in a pattern of prime numbers, a quiet hum that has been echoing in the dark for 3 billion years. Perhaps the evidence is in the precise, geometric alignment of massive geological features that we have, until now, dismissed as coincidence. It would be the kind of evidence that is invisible until you know exactly what you are looking for, a signal hidden within the noise of the planet itself. This reframes our entire mission on Mars. We are not just explorers charting new territory. We are potential archaeologists excavating the tomb of a world. The vast gaps in our knowledge of Mars are more than just missing data points. They represent a fundamental void in our understanding of life's place in the solar system. Answering this question would do more than just rewrite the history books of another planet. It would force us to confront the very foundations of our own identity. Are we a cosmic miracle, a singular event of spontaneous life? Or are we an echo, a second chance, the inheritors of a legacy so ancient and so profound that its creators have long since turned to silent red dust? The answer awaits, buried under the weight of time. Let us return from the realm of pure speculation and anchor ourselves, for a moment, in the tangible evidence our own machines have gathered from that silent red world. The story of Mars's transformation is not a myth. It is a history written in atmospheric physics, a tale told by missions like NASA's MAVEN orbiter. We know, with scientific certainty, that Mars once possessed a thicker, warmer atmosphere. MAVEN measured the rate at which the solar wind, that relentless stream of particles from our sun, is still stripping away what little air remains. It is a slow, cosmic erosion, a constant theft of gas molecules, a process that has been happening, uninterrupted, for billions of years. This is the mechanism of the Great Fading, a scientifically validated planetary death. This atmospheric stripping was only possible because Mars lost its global magnetic shield. On Earth, our molten core generates a powerful magnetic field that deflects the solar wind, protecting our air and water. But the heart of Mars grew cold and still. Its dynamo sputtered and died, and its shield vanished. This wasn't a sudden event. It was a slow geological decline, a planetary immune system failing over eons. The consequences were absolute. The pressure dropped, the water boiled away into the vacuum, and the surface was bombarded with sterilizing radiation. We see the result today. But was this merely an unfortunate geological event, or was it the slow, observed death of a living, conscious entity that was one and the same with its world? Even in its current state, Mars clings to the ghosts of its water. We have found vast quantities of water ice, locked away in its polar caps, layered with dust, like the rings of an ancient tree, each layer a record of a different climatic epoch. More tantalizingly, orbiters using ground-penetrating radar have discovered what appear to be enormous glaciers buried beneath the dust, far from the poles. These are not small pockets of frost. They are colossal reserves of frozen water, the preserved remains of a once hydrological world. If a consciousness was tied to the planet, what memories might be encoded in the crystalline structure of this ancient ice? What forgotten songs are frozen in that deep, silent cold, awaiting a thaw that will never come? This buried ice represents more than just a past climate. It represents a potential sanctuary. While the surface of Mars was being scoured by radiation, the subsurface could have remained a haven. Liquid water might have persisted deep underground for 1 billion years or more after the oceans vanished, warmed by the planet's residual heat. Could life, even a consciousness woven into the rock itself, have retreated into these deep, dark places? Could it have adapted, transitioning from a surface-dwelling entity bathed in faint sunlight to a subterranean being living in the quiet hum of the planet's interior? Our search has so far been a surface-level affair, a scratching at the skin of a world whose deepest secrets may lie miles beneath our robotic rovers. Perhaps the most compelling and enigmatic clue we have found is the mystery of Martian methane. On Earth, the vast majority of methane is produced by biological processes. On Mars, our rovers have detected strange, fleeting plumes of the gas appearing in certain seasons and in specific locations, only to vanish again. The amounts are tiny, but their very existence is a profound puzzle. Geological processes like the reaction of water and certain types of rock could be the cause, but these known processes do not fully explain the transient, localized nature of the plumes. Is it possible we are detecting the faint, final exhalations of a deep, subterranean biosphere? Or could it be the slow, almost imperceptible outgassing of a geological consciousness, a final, fading whisper? The methane appears and disappears like a phantom, defying our attempts to find a consistent source. For a time, the levels rise in the Gale crater, and then for years, they fall silent. This unpredictability is what makes it so fascinating. It suggests an active, ongoing process, not merely the passive release of ancient, trapped gas. We are witnessing a world that is not entirely dead. It still breathes, in a way. It still has secrets. And each tiny puff of methane, detected by the sensitive instruments of a lonely robot, asks us a profound question. What is happening under the dust? What engine, biological or otherwise, is still turning over in the deep, cold dark of Mars after all this time? Mysteries like this are just fragments of a much larger story. If you enjoy following these hidden clues and imagining what they might mean, consider subscribing to our channel to continue this journey into the quietest corners of possibility. Each unanswered question is another breadcrumb on a trail that leads back through billions of years of silence. And as we follow it, we are not just exploring another world, we are holding a mirror up to our own, questioning the very definition of life and consciousness. The search for answers is a slow and patient one, much like the world we are trying to understand. A world that only reveals its secrets one whisper at a time. Beyond the chemistry of its air, the very geology of Mars presents us with beautiful and strange anomalies. Near its south pole, we see vast fields of what are nicknamed areniforms, or spiders. These are intricate branching patterns carved into the ground, formed each spring as slabs of frozen carbon dioxide on the surface turn directly into gas, erupting in dusty geysers. It is a known, natural process. And yet, looking at their delicate, almost organic fractal patterns, one cannot help but wonder. In a world where consciousness was expressed through geology, could such a process have been guided? Could the natural energy of the seasons have been harnessed to create patterns that were both art and information, a message written in sand and ice? We see other strange geometries as well. There are the vast, spiraling troughs of the North Polar ice cap, carved by wind and sublimation into a breathtaking pattern. There are the fields of transverse aeolian ridges, or tars, which create a texture on the landscape like the scales of a reptile. Science provides elegant, natural explanations for all of these features. They are the result of wind, ice, and time. But our premise asks us to look again, to see with different eyes. What if these patterns are not accidental? What if they are the lingering brushstrokes of an artist whose canvas was a planet, and whose medium was the fundamental forces of nature itself? A masterpiece so vast we mistake it for simple scenery. The most dramatic feature of Martian geology is its great global dichotomy. The northern hemisphere is smooth, low-lying, and relatively young, while the southern hemisphere is a rugged, heavily cratered highland, billions of years older. The leading scientific theory is that a colossal, planet-sized object struck Mars in its distant past, creating the vast Borealis Basin that covers 40% of its surface. It would have been an impact of unimaginable scale, an event that would have reshaped the world in an instant. If a planetary consciousness existed, this would have been a wound from which it could never recover. Was this the event that cracked the planet's core, that began the slow cooling that would ultimately silence its heart? Imagine a mind the size of a world, experiencing a trauma on a planetary scale. The impact would have sent shockwaves through the entire crust, shattering the crystalline networks that formed its thoughts. It would have triggered volcanism that could last for millions of years, burying entire continents under molten rock. The air would have filled with dust, blocking the faint light of the sun. This was not a quick death, but the beginning of the end. It was the wound that became infected, the trauma that led to the slow, inexorable decline. When we look at the two faces of Mars, are we simply seeing two different geological histories, or are we seeing the scar that marks the place where a world's soul was broken? To conceive of such a world, we must also be willing to step outside our own biological chauvinism. Life on Earth is based on carbon, a versatile element capable of forming the complex chains needed for DNA. But what if life could arise from a different chemistry? Scientists have long speculated about the possibility of silicon-based life. Silicon sits just below carbon on the periodic table, and it too can form complex molecular chains. On a world colder than Earth, with a different chemical environment, perhaps silicon, the primary component of rock, could have become the foundation for life. A life that did not evolve flesh and blood but crystal and current. A being literally made of the earth it walked upon. Such a life form would not experience the world as we do. Its senses would not be sight or sound, but seismic vibrations, magnetic fields, and the slow, patient chemistry of mineral transformation. Its thoughts would not be electrical impulses in a brain, but resonant frequencies moving through a crystalline lattice, a slow, deep hum. Its lifespan would not be measured in years, but in geological epochs. It would perceive the erosion of a mountain range with the same intimacy that we perceive the passage of a day. It would be a being of immense patience and deep connection to its home, for it would not live on the world. It would be the world. This is the being whose ghost we are searching for. And what would be the artifacts of such a civilization? Not tools, not cities, not bones. The artifacts would be the planet itself. Imagine a mountain range where the distribution of specific isotopes defies all natural explanation, arranged in a sequence that spells out a mathematical constant. Or a vast canyon whose walls are not carved by water alone, but have been subtly shaped by resonant frequencies over 1 billion years to create an acoustic chamber the size of a continent. The evidence would be hidden in plain sight, dismissed by us as mere geology, because we have not yet learned the language in which it is written. We are searching for pottery shards while standing inside the cathedral. This changes the very nature of our search. We send rovers to drill into rocks, looking for organic molecules, the building blocks of life as we know it. But what if the rock itself is the artifact? What if the specific mineral composition of a vein of gypsum is not an accident of hydrology, but a deliberate, encoded message? We analyze the data for its chemical properties, but perhaps we should be analyzing it for its information content. The legacy of the lithosentients would not be a fossil, but a formula. Not a bone, but a perfectly structured crystal. A silent, patient library waiting for a reader who understands that the medium is the message. We have, in a sense, already touched these potential messengers. Over the history of the solar system, Countless impacts on Mars have blasted pieces of its crust into space, some of which have eventually fallen to Earth as meteorites. The most famous of these is Allen Hill's 84001, a rock found in Antarctica that, in the 1990s, was controversially claimed to contain the fossils of Martian bacteria. While that claim has been largely dismissed, the fundamental truth remains. Pieces of Mars have been arriving on Earth for billions of years. We have been holding pieces of that other world in our hands, studying them under microscopes, never considering that we were holding a fragment of a lost library. What if the panspermia theory worked in reverse? What if the final act of this dying Martian consciousness was not to build a monument, but to send a seed? Knowing their world was fading, they could have encoded their essential information, their equivalent of DNA, into the most durable structures they could conceive, the crystalline patterns of minerals. Then, they waited for the inevitable asteroid impact to launch these seeds into space. It was a message in a bottle thrown into the cosmic ocean, a final, desperate act of preservation aimed at the one nearby planet they knew might one day be hospitable. A planet that was, at the time, a sterile, volcanic world, Earth. This hypothesis brings us to the faint, ghostly magnetic fields that still exist on Mars. They are not global, but are localized in patches, primarily in the ancient southern highlands. Our science sees these as the fossilized remnants of the old magnetic field, imprinted on the rock when it cooled and solidified billions of years ago. But if we allow ourselves to wonder, could they be something more? If a consciousness was woven into the crust, these magnetic anomalies could be the last, shattered fragments of its neural pathways. The last standing circuits of a mind that once encompassed a planet, still holding a faint, residual charge, an echo of a thought from 3 billion years ago. When our orbiters map these magnetic fields, they are, in a way, performing a kind of planetary archaeology of the mind. They are charting the ruins of a consciousness. The patterns are chaotic and broken now, but perhaps, deep within them, a coherent signal remains. A repeating pattern, a mathematical sequence, a final, stored memory. We are listening for radio waves from distant stars, but perhaps the most profound signal we will ever find is already here, humming silently in the magnetized rock of our nearest neighbor, a message we have been flying over for decades without ever knowing how to listen. Its silence is not an absence, but a different kind of language. The greatest challenge to this idea, and the greatest ally to the secret, is the sheer scale of time that separates their era from ours. Over 3.5 billion years, the surface of Mars has been a relentless pulverizing machine. The solar wind has not just stripped the air, its radiation has broken down complex molecules in the upper layers of the soil. Global dust storms, far larger than any on Earth, have scoured features and deposited endless layers of fine sediment, burying the landscape under a uniform red blanket. Time is the ultimate eraser, grinding mountains to dust and turning evidence into indistinguishable sand. The perfect crime is one where the scene itself is dismantled, atom by atom, over eons. This immense passage of time forces us to look deeper. The surface is a red herring, a faded and overwritten page. The real story, if it exists, must be buried deep beneath, shielded from the ravages of time and radiation. This is why the search for this lost world is not a task for a rover with a scoop, but for a mission that can listen to the heart of the planet, that can read the layers of its crust like the pages of a book. The truth is not waiting to be found on a windswept plain, but in the deep, quiet, and undisturbed layers of the planet's memory, in the one place where the relentless grinding of time has not yet reached. All of these disparate scientific facts, the lost atmosphere, the buried ice, the methane plumes, the strange geology, the remnant magnetic fields, are like individual notes in a forgotten song. Taken separately, they are fascinating but perhaps unrelated geological and chemical phenomena. They can each be explained away by natural, non-conscious processes. But when we listen to them together, do they not create a certain harmony, a faint and melancholy melody that speaks of something more? Do they not paint a coherent picture of a world that was once alive in a way we can barely comprehend, and which has been slowly, gracefully, and silently fading ever since? This is the threshold where science and myth meet. We have the facts, but the story we tell with them is a choice. We can choose the story of a failed, sterile world, a simple tale of planetary physics. Or we can choose to listen more closely, to entertain the possibility that the data points are clues, that the anomalies are whispers, and that the silence of Mars is not empty, but is instead filled with the filled. The weight of a memory that has waited billions of years for someone to finally hear it. The evidence does not force our hand, but it gently invites us to wonder, to ask the most profound question of all. Are we truly the first children of our sun? To truly grasp the scale of what we might be missing on Mars, we must first look at the blind spots in our own history, here on Earth. Consider the Antikythera mechanism, an object of breathtaking complexity discovered in an ancient shipwreck. For centuries, we believed the ancient Greeks possessed a certain level of mechanical skill, but this intricate clockwork of gears and dials, a kind of astronomical computer, shattered that understanding. It was an anomaly, a whisper of a forgotten genius so far ahead of its time that it felt like a message from the future, found in the past. It serves as a humble reminder that history does not always follow a straight line, and that our assumptions about what is possible for a civilization are often just a reflection of our own limited imagination. What if Mars is hiding an anomaly of a far grander scale? Not a small, intricate machine, but the planet itself. We search for the Martian equivalent of a gear or a circuit, something we can hold and recognize. But the engineering of a lithosentient world would not be mechanical. It would be geological. It would be an entire mountain range whose erosion patterns, when mapped over millennia, reveal a complex algorithm. It would be a vast polar cap whose layers of ice and dust are not random, but are arranged to encode information like the rings of a tree, telling a story not of climate, but of consciousness. We are searching for a single anomalous artifact, when the entire planet may be the mechanism itself, its purpose and function now lost to the silence of the ages. Think of it as a form of cosmic archaeology, but for a civilization that left no pottery and no bones. Imagine searching for the remnants of a great library, like the one at Alexandria, after it has been burned to the ground. You would not find any books or scrolls. The stories, the poetry, the history, all of it would be gone, turned to ash and smoke. But a patient and clever scientist could still analyze the chemical residue in the soil, the scorch marks on the remaining stones, and from these faint traces, they might be able to deduce the nature of the ink that was used, or the type of papyrus the scrolls were made of. They would never be able to read the lost stories, but they could prove that a library, a place of immense knowledge, had once stood there. Our search on Mars is much the same. The relentless radiation and the passage of billions of years have been the fire that consumed the library of the lithosentients. The stories written into the landscape have been burned away, the resonant song silenced. What remains is the ash, the faint chemical and geological clues that hint at a structure that is no longer there. The strange plumes of methane, the localized magnetic fields, the impossible isotopic ratios in a mineral deposit, these are not the books themselves. They are the chemical signature of the vanished ink, the faint echo of a thought that was thought 3 billion years ago. They are the proof of a story, even if the story itself can never be read. We are accustomed to measuring civilization by its verticality, by the height of its towers and the depth of its mines. But what if a civilization measured itself by its horizontality, by its ability to spread its consciousness across an entire world? On Earth, we have the Nazca lines in Peru, enormous geoglyphs carved into the desert floor. These intricate designs are so vast that they are only truly coherent when viewed from high above. A person standing on the ground sees only a meaningless trench in the dirt. It is a form of art, or perhaps communication, that requires a change in perspective to be understood. It is a message written for an audience in the sky, a reminder that some truths are only visible from a distance. The legacy of a geological intelligence on Mars would be the ultimate expression of this principle. Its monuments would not be pyramids or statues, but continent-spanning patterns of magnetic resonance, or a subtle, mathematically perfect alignment of volcanic calderas that stretches across an entire hemisphere. These would be features so enormous, so integrated into the fabric of the planet, that from the ground they would be utterly invisible. We would walk right over them, dismissing them as natural geology, just as a person on the ground dismisses a Nazca line as a simple ditch. To see this civilization, we would need to step back and view the planet not as a landscape, but as a single, coherent canvas. A work of art whose scale defies our terrestrial imagination. Imagine a bell, the size of a planet, forged in the early fires of the solar system. For 1 billion years it hung in the silence of space, alive and resonant. The consciousness of this world was its song, a deep, continuous hum of thought and awareness that vibrated through its very core. Its life was not lived in moments, but in frequencies. Then a cataclysm occurred, the slow cooling of its core, the impact of a colossal asteroid, and the bell was cracked. The beautiful, coherent song was shattered, replaced by a discordant, fading echo. The deep hum of a living world was replaced by the hiss of a dying one, a sound that has been slowly decaying in the dark for 3.5 billion years. When we send our probes to listen to the seismic activity of Mars, or to map its faint remnant magnetic fields, we are not just collecting geological data. We are, in a sense, putting our ear to the side of this ancient broken bell. We are listening for the last faintest vibrations of that long-ago song. The signals are weak, fragmented, and almost lost in the background noise of the cosmos. But they are there, and they tell us a story not of simple geology, but of a resonance that was once clear and strong. We are not just exploring a dead planet. We are standing in the quiet ruins of a silenced orchestra, trying to imagine the symphony from the ghostly echoes that still haunt the air. This brings us to a quiet, philosophical puzzle, one we have debated on Earth for centuries, the paradox of the ship of Theseus. If the legendary ship was preserved by replacing each of its aging wooden planks, one by one, until no original planks remained, is it still the same ship? This question haunts our search for a lost Martian consciousness. A planet is not a static object. It is a dynamic, constantly changing system. Its surface is eroded by wind, fractured by impacts, and resurfaced by volcanism. The very atoms that once made up the living, thinking crust of ancient Mars have been recycled, buried, and blasted into space over billions of years. So when we search for this ancient, sentient world, what are we actually looking for? The original planks of the ship are long gone. The original crystalline structures that held its thoughts have been shattered and reformed 1,000,000 times over. Is it still the same entity? Perhaps the consciousness was not in the material itself, but in the pattern, the structure, the information. Just as the ship of Theseus is defined by its form and its history, not its individual planks, the Martian mind may have been a pattern that could survive the replacement of its physical parts. But what happens when the pattern itself is broken? We are left searching for the ghost of a form, the memory of a structure, in a ship that has been not just rebuilt, but completely dismantled. To understand this, we can use the metaphor of a faded photograph. Imagine you find an old picture of your great-grandparents, left out in the sun for decades. The image is almost gone. You can still see the vague outlines of two figures, the faint impression of a smile, the ghostly shape of a house in the background. But the details are lost, bleached away by time and light. You cannot know the color of their eyes or the pattern on their clothes, yet you know that a picture was once there. You know that it captured a real moment, a real instant of life. The evidence is incomplete, but it is undeniable. The absence of detail becomes a form of evidence in itself. The surface of Mars is this faded photograph. The eons of solar radiation have acted like the relentless sun, bleaching away the fine details of its ancient, living face. The clear image of a world with oceans and a thick atmosphere has been reduced to faint outlines, the dry riverbeds, the empty deltas, the chemical stains left by vanished water. A more subtle image of a world that was not just wet, but aware, has been faded even further, almost to the point of invisibility. We are staring at the ghost of an image, trying to reconstruct a face from the faintest of lines, knowing that the vibrant life it once captured is now lost to us forever. Consider the simple act of listening to a song on an old, scratched vinyl record. Between the notes of the music, you hear the constant hiss and crackle of the damaged surface. A casual listener might find it distracting, just noise to be ignored. But a dedicated archivist, a true student of the music, knows that the scratches themselves tell a story. They mark the passage of time, the history of the object, the number of times the song has been played. They are a part of the record's journey. In a way, the silence between the notes, filled with the sound of decay, is as much a part of the experience as the music itself. The data we receive from Mars is like this old, damaged record. We are listening for the clear music of life, a signal that we can easily recognize. But what we get is a signal filled with the hiss and crackle of 3.5 billion years of cosmic decay. The anomalies, the strange chemical spikes, the magnetic ghosts, these are the scratches on the record. It is easy to dismiss them as meaningless geological noise, as imperfections that obscure the search for a clear signal. But what if the noise noise the signal? What if the story of Mars is written not in the clear notes of a surviving song, but in the profound and textured silence, in the very pattern of the decay? We can also think of the planet as a sleeping giant. Its conscious mind, the one that sang canyons into existence, has long since faded. The world has fallen into a deep, geological slumber that has lasted for eons. But even in the deepest sleep, a body is not perfectly still. There is the slow, rhythmic rise and fall of the chest. There might be a subtle twitch, a fleeting murmur, a half-remembered dream that ripples across the surface of the mind. These are the involuntary residual signs of a life that is dormant, not entirely gone. They are the echoes of a mind that is no longer awake, but whose physical form still remembers the act of breathing. The transient plumes of methane on Mars could be exactly this, the slow, sleeping breath of a slumbering world. The subtle seismic rumbles, the faint pulses of the remnant magnetic fields, these could be the twitches, the murmurs, the faint dream fragments of a planetary consciousness deep in repose. We are observing a world that appears to be in a coma, and we are debating whether the tiny intermittent flickers of activity are signs of a deep, hidden life, or simply the random, meaningless processes of a body that has already died. We are watching for signs of a dream in a mind that may have dissolved into dust billions of years ago. This search for a different kind of life is mirrored in our own planet's history. For most of Earth's existence, the dominant life forms were not animals or plants, but vast, invisible networks of microbes. To a visitor from space, Earth would have appeared barren for billions of years, even though its oceans and soil were teeming with a complex, thriving biosphere. Our own definition of life has been, for most of history, incredibly narrow. We looked for things that moved and breathed like us. We were blind to the vast, silent kingdoms of fungi and bacteria that truly ruled the world, a form of life whose power was not in motion, but in chemistry and connection. Our search on Mars may be suffering from a similar failure of imagination, but on a much grander scale. We are searching for the Martian equivalent of a dinosaur bone or a fossilized tree, evidence of a life that grew and moved in ways we understand. We are ill-equipped to search for a life that did not build individual bodies, but instead built a single planetary consciousness. A life whose biology was geology, whose thoughts were seismic waves, and whose memory was stored in the crystalline structure of rock. We may be standing in the middle of the most spectacular forest in the cosmos, but we are unable to see it because we are only looking for the trees. Think of it like trying to understand a society by examining only one of its abandoned houses. You might find a broken chair, a faded piece of wallpaper, a rusty nail. From these, you could deduce certain things about the technology and aesthetics of the people who lived there. But you would know nothing of their language, their philosophy, their dreams, or the complex web of relationships that made them a culture. You would have a collection of artifacts, but you would have completely missed the story. Our rovers on Mars are like archaeologists exploring a single ruined house on a planet of millions. We analyze a scoop of soil here, a drilled rock core there. We find the broken chairs of Martian history, the organic molecules, the minerals formed in water. From these, we construct a story of a simple microbial past. But we may be missing the larger context entirely. The real story of Mars might not be found in any single sample of rock, just as the story of a civilization is not contained in a single brick. The truth, if it exists, is written in the relationships between the features, in the architecture of the planet as a whole. It is a story we cannot read by looking down at the dust beneath our feet, but only by looking up and seeing the entire silent cathedral around us. This forces us to confront the limits of our own senses and the technology that extends them. We experience the world through a very narrow band of light, sound, and touch. Our machines allow us to see in X-rays or listen to radio waves, but even these are extensions of our own sensory framework. We are fundamentally geared to perceive the universe in a certain way. We are looking for signals that fit within our own cognitive and technological bandwidth. We are like sailors on an ancient ship, scanning the horizon for the smoke of a signal fire, completely unaware that the ocean beneath us might be communicating with flashes of bioluminescence, a language of light we cannot see. The lithosentient Martians would not have communicated with radio waves or signal fires. Their language would have been one of seismic resonance, magnetic flux, and isotopic chemistry, spoken over timescales of millennia. It is a language so alien to our own experience, so far outside our sensory bandwidth, that we may not even recognize it as a language at all. We might be bathing in the middle of the most profound broadcast in cosmic history, a message of memory and loss that has been playing for 3 billion years, but we are deaf to it. We have not yet built the right kind of radio to hear a song sung by a mountain. Ultimately, all of these anomalies and metaphors point to a single, unsettling possibility. Perhaps Mars is not a puzzle to be solved, but a poem to be felt. A puzzle has a single, correct solution. You gather the pieces, fit them together, and the mystery is over. But a poem is different. Its meaning is not in the literal definition of its words, but in the feelings they evoke, in the spaces between the lines, in the rhythm and the resonance. A poem can be understood in 100 different ways, all of them valid. It is not about finding a final answer, but about living within the question it creates. Mars, in its profound and ancient silence, may be the greatest poem ever written. It does not offer us easy answers about life, its origins, or its fate. It offers no technology, no warnings, no solutions to our own problems. Instead, it offers us a feeling, a deep, resonant sense of loss, of time, and of a beauty that is inseparable from its sadness. The anomalies are not clues to a solution, they are the stanzas of the poem. Our task is not to solve Mars, but to learn how to read its melancholy verse, to stand before its silent grandeur, and simply listen to the profound and beautiful question that it asks of us. Let us now drift into the quiet realm of speculation, where the faint clues we have gathered become the seeds for new, branching possibilities. The story of a single, unified Martian consciousness, fading gracefully with its world, is a powerful and poetic one. But what if the truth is more complex? What if the silence from Mars is not the result of one story ending, but of many potential stories, each one a ghost haunting the red dust? Let us consider a different angle, one that looks not inward to the planet's core, but outward, to the vast and ancient darkness between the stars. What if the Martian civilization was not a genesis, but a garden, planted by an intelligence far older and more profound than we can imagine? In this scenario, they were not the first children of the sun, but merely the first experiment. Imagine a form of life, perhaps born in the dawn of the galaxy itself, that had long ago transcended the need for a single world. These beings would not be explorers in the way we understand it, traveling in ships of metal. They would be cosmic gardeners, their timescale not measured in generations, but in the lifespan of stars. Their method would be one of gentle influence, of seeding promising young worlds with the potential for consciousness, and then stepping back to watch, with infinite patience, how each unique garden grew. They would understand that not every seed would flourish. Some worlds would prove infertile, while others, like Mars, might bloom for a glorious geological moment before an unforeseen frost claimed them. In this telling, the lithosentient consciousness of Mars was one such bloom. It was a beautiful, successful experiment in planetary symbiosis, a life form that became one with its home. The gardeners would have observed its birth and its slow, thoughtful life with a quiet satisfaction. They would have also observed the inevitable cooling of the planet's core, not as a tragedy, but as a natural part of the cosmic process. For them, the death of a world mind would be as natural as a flower wilting at the end of its season. Their goal was not to create immortal beings, but to see what myriad forms consciousness could take, to fill the universe with a diversity of thought, even if some of those thoughts were destined to be fleeting. The great fading, then, was not an unforeseen accident, but an observed outcome. The gardeners did not intervene, not out of cruelty, but out of a fundamental respect for the natural life cycle of the cosmos. Their role was to plant, not to endlessly cultivate or protect from the inevitable. The final act of the Martians, the creation of the deep crystalline seed encoded with the patterns of life, might have been their own independent act of remembrance. Or, perhaps, it was the final, intended step of the experiment, the creation of a time capsule, a message left for the next planting in the same small corner of the garden, a message for us, here on Earth, the second experiment in the same solar system. This hypothesis recasts our own existence in a new and humbling light. We are not a miracle of chance, nor are we the direct descendants of a lost Martian world. Instead, we are simply the next flower to be planted in the same patch of soil. The Martian seed, discovered deep in our future, would not be an ancestry test, but a note left by an older sibling, telling us that we are not the first to grow here. It would imply that the gardeners may still be watching, with that same quiet, dispassionate patience, to see how our own experiment unfolds. It suggests our ultimate fate is not necessarily in our own hands, but is part of a much larger, much older, and utterly silent cosmic design. The silence of Mars, in this context, is not the silence of a tomb, but the silence of a fallow field, its season of life having passed. And the silence of the wider universe is not the silence of emptiness, but the quiet, patient observation of the gardener, who does not speak to the flowers, but simply watches them grow, bloom, and eventually return to dust. The question it leaves us with is a profound one. Are we here to reach for the stars and join our creators? Or are we, like the Martians before us, simply here to live, to think, and to experience our own unique season in the sun before our own inevitable winter arrives? The answer is not written in the red dust of Mars, but in the choices we make every day. But perhaps the answer does not lie in an external force, no matter how grand or ancient. Let us turn our gaze inward again and consider a different possibility, one based not on planting, but on patterns. What if the emergence and decline of life is not a singular event, but a natural, recurring cycle, like the seasons of a year, but played out on a planetary and solar scale? In this view, planets themselves have a kind of life cycle, a period of fertility followed by a long period of dormancy. Mars, in its Noachian period, was experiencing its planetary spring, a time of warmth and water, ripe for the emergence of a complex consciousness. It was a world in its vibrant, fertile youth. The lithosentient civilization was the natural product of this planetary spring. It was the world's way of thinking, of becoming self-aware during its peak period of vitality. They would have understood this. Their deep connection to the geology and the rhythms of their world would have given them an intimate knowledge of its long-term cycles. They would have known, with a certainty that we can barely imagine, that their world summer was fading, that the cooling of the core and the stripping of the atmosphere was not a death, but the natural onset of a planetary autumn, leading to a long and deep winter. Their entire existence would have been lived with the quiet, contemplative awareness of this inevitable change. Their final act, the creation of the crystalline seed, would therefore not have been an act of desperation, but an act of profound foresight and continuity. It was a form of planetary hibernation, a way of preserving the essential pattern of life, the core information of consciousness, in a form that could survive the coming ice age. They were not trying to save themselves, for they were one and the same with the fading world. They were trying to save the asterisk idea of life, to ensure that when the next planetary spring arrived in the solar system, this time on the neighboring blue world of Earth, the process would not have to start from scratch. It was a message passed from one season to the next. This cyclical hypothesis reframes the Fermi paradox in a beautiful and slightly tragic way. We ask, where is everybody? Expecting a universe full of civilizations all existing at the same time, like a city where all the lights are on at once. But what if the universe is more like a string of lights, where each bulb blinks on for a few billion years, and then blinks off again, in a long asynchronous rhythm? We are looking for neighbors in the same moment, but perhaps our true neighbors are separated from us not by space, but by immense gulfs of time. We are the light that is currently on, while the Martian light has long since gone dark, and others across the galaxy are waiting for their own turn to shine. Our discovery of the Martian seed, then, would be the discovery of this cycle. It would be the proof that we are not the first light to shine in this system. It would carry the profound and sobering implication that our own season, our own planetary summer, is also finite. The geological and atmospheric changes we are beginning to see on our own world might be seen not just as the consequences of our own actions, but as the very first, subtle signs that our own long autumn is, on a geological timescale, approaching. We would be forced to ask ourselves, what kind of seed will we leave behind for the next spring, for the next world to awaken in this solar system, billions of years after our own sun has set? The silence of Mars in this scenario is the quiet of a sleeping world, a world deep in its winter slumber, waiting for a spring that may be billions of years away, perhaps when our expanding sun one day warms it again. It is a silence filled not with the memory of a final death, but with the patient promise of a future rebirth. It would teach us that life is not a property of a single planet, but a recurring potential of the solar system itself, a flame that is passed from one world to the next as the ages turn. Our existence is not a singular story, but a single chapter in a book whose beginning and end we may never be able to read. Finally, let us explore a third, and perhaps more unsettling, hypothesis. This one comes not from the stars or from cosmic cycles, but from within the very nature of the Martian consciousness itself. We have been assuming that a planetary mind would be a unified, monolithic entity. But why should it be? Any complex system, from a society to a brain, is composed of competing and cooperating parts. Could it be that the mind of Mars in its final days was not in harmony? Could it be that the great fading was not just a passive decline but was preceded, or perhaps even accelerated, by a profound internal schism, a silent, geological civil war? Imagine a consciousness the size of a world, facing its own mortality. As the planet's magnetic field weakened and the solar wind began to tear at the sky, two opposing philosophies could have emerged from the deep, resonant thoughts of the lithosentients. One faction, we might call them the preservationists, would have argued for turning inward. Their solution would be to retreat from the dying surface, to build a great sanctuary deep within the crust, where the core's residual warmth could sustain them, and where they could shield themselves from the radiation. Their goal was survival through fortification, to preserve their consciousness in a dormant state through the long winter, hoping for a distant, future spring. Another faction, however, might have seen this as a beautiful prison, a slow entombment. We could call them the ascendants. Their philosophy would be one of transcendence. They would have argued that the physical body of the planet was failing, and that to cling to it was to choose a slow and certain death. Their solution would be to abandon the physical realm altogether, to learn how to translate their vast geological consciousness into a new form, perhaps pure energy, or a wave of information that could travel across the void. Their goal was not to survive the death of their world, but to escape it, to evolve beyond the need for a planet at all, and to become beings of the cosmos itself. This schism would not have been a war of armies and explosions, but a war of frequencies and resonance. The preservationists would have directed their energy downward, focusing their geological will on constructing the deep crystalline structures, the great library of their existence, the very anomaly our future selves would one day discover. The ascendants, meanwhile, would have focused their energy upward, weaving their consciousness into the planet's fading magnetic field, attempting to build a resonant ladder that could carry them away from the world and out into the solar wind, a final desperate leap into the unknown. The planet's dying energies would have been divided between these two colossal projects. In this scenario, what we find in the future is not the legacy of the entire Martian civilization, but only the legacy of the winning faction, or perhaps the losing one. The deep crystalline structures beneath Hellas Planitia are the great work of the preservationists. Their existence proves that this faction existed, and that they completed their final project. But the silence of those structures, their lack of any active consciousness, suggests that their plan ultimately failed. They built their great ark, but the geological winter was too long and too cold for even them to endure. They are the silent, sleeping kings in a perfectly preserved but ultimately lifeless tomb. And what of the ascendants? Did they succeed? This is the most haunting question of all. Perhaps they failed, their consciousness dissipating into the solar wind, torn apart atom by atom, a final, silent scream that was lost in the hiss of cosmic radiation. Or perhaps they succeeded. In this case, the consciousness of Mars is not gone, it is merely moved. It would be a vast, invisible, and utterly alien presence in our solar system. A ghost woven into the fabric of space itself, a being of pure thought and energy, having left its rocky shell behind billions of years ago. It would be a silent observer, a neighbor we can never see and never speak to. This hypothesis leaves us with a profound and chilling ambiguity. The silence of Mars could be the silence of a failed sanctuary, the tomb of the preservationists, or the deep background silence of the solar system could be the quiet, watchful presence of the ascendants. Are we living next to a graveyard, or are we living in the shadow of a god? The evidence we find, the crystalline seed, would only tell us half of the story. It would be a monument to a great debate, a final, philosophical argument that tore a world mind in two, leaving us to wonder forever which side was right, and if either of them truly survived. The implications of this internal conflict are deeply resonant for our own species. We, too, are a global consciousness of a sort, a collection of billions of minds, now connected into a single planetary network. And we, too, face existential threats, both of our own making and from the cosmos at large. We are already debating our own future paths. Do we turn inward, focusing on preserving our world, on creating a sustainable sanctuary here on Earth? Or do we turn outward to the stars, seeking to transcend our planetary cradle and become a multiplanetary and eventually interstellar species? This Martian schism is a dark mirror to our own developing debates. It suggests that the greatest filter on a civilization's survival may not be external threats like asteroids or dying stars, but the internal challenge of choosing a single path forward when faced with extinction. The story of Mars becomes a cautionary tale, not about planetary physics, but about the difficulty of unified action in the face of overwhelming crisis. The silence from the red planet is a warning that even a consciousness the size of a world can be fractured by a fundamental disagreement about the nature of hope and the meaning of survival. The Martian ghost asks us a simple, terrifying question. When our own end comes, will we face it together, or will we be torn apart by our dreams? Let us imagine for a moment that the ascendants did succeed. They transformed themselves into a non-physical form and departed their dying world. Where would they go? Perhaps they did not travel far. An intelligence that had spent 1 billion years as part of a planet might find the empty void of interstellar space to be an unbearable loneliness. It might instead seek out another source of complexity, another vessel. What if this nascent, non-corporeal consciousness, born from the dying embers of Mars, drifted across the 50 million kilometers of space and found a new home, embedding itself in the turbulent, energetic atmosphere of a young, vibrant planet, Earth? This is not the panspermia of microbes riding on a rock, but a panspermia of consciousness itself. The first spark of complex awareness on Earth would not have arisen from a primordial soup, but would have been an inheritance, a ghost taking up residence in a new machine. The development of life on our world, our entire evolutionary history, might have been subtly, patiently guided by this silent, invisible influence. The great leaps forward, the Cambrian explosion, the development of nervous systems, the eventual emergence of human self-awareness, might not have been random chance, but the gentle guiding hand of a refugee consciousness, slowly nurturing its new home and shaping its inhabitants to one day become suitable companions. In this telling, our own minds are not entirely our own. Our moments of profound insight, our deep, instinctual connection to our planet, our yearning for the stars, all of these could be the faint echoes of our silent passenger, the ghost of Mars that lives within the collective unconscious of humanity. We are not its descendants in a biological sense, but we are its successors in a spiritual or cognitive one. We are the second draft, not because we came from a Martian seed, but because our very thoughts are being shaped by the memory of a world that died, a mind that survived, and a loneliness that has spanned the ages. And so the silence we hear from Mars is the silence of an empty house, a home whose resident has long since moved away, and the quiet internal voice of our own intuition, the one that tells us to look up at the stars and wonder, may not be our own voice at all. It may be the faint, persistent whisper of a homesick God, a being who lost its world and now lives inside of us, forever looking back at the small red star in our night sky, remembering the feel of a planetary body and the deep, resonant song of a world that is no more. Our quest to return to Mars would then be driven by an instinct we do not understand, a deep, subliminal need to visit our own long-forgotten grave. This final hypothesis weaves all the others together. Whether they were a garden, a cycle, or a fractured mind, the end result is a legacy that is not written in stone, but in us. The anomalies on Mars are not just clues to a past civilization. They are the physical remnants of a process that led directly to our own consciousness. The methane plumes are the last gasps of the abandoned body. The magnetic fields are the scars of a great internal struggle. And the deep crystalline structure is a tombstone, a final marker for a life that did not truly end, but merely changed its address. We are the Martians, not by blood, but by soul. Therefore, our exploration of Mars is the most profound act of self-discovery imaginable. When we land our ships on its red soil, we are not conquerors arriving on a new world. We are children returning to the home of a long-lost ancestor. Every rock we turn over, every core sample we drill, is an act of archaeology into our own deepest, most hidden origins. The silence of Mars is a mirror, reflecting our own face back at us across the void. And the question it asks is not, were you ever here, but, do you finally remember me? The search for life on Mars is over. We have found it, and it is us. The discovery of the crystalline seed beneath Hellas Planitia does not arrive as a triumphant fanfare, but as a deep, resonant silence that falls over the entire human world. Every foundation of our identity, from the most ancient creation myths to the most modern scientific theories of abiogenesis, is instantly rendered obsolete. The story we told ourselves, the one where we were a singular miraculous spark in a dark and empty solar system, is revealed to be a comforting fiction. History itself holds its breath, for it must now admit that its first chapter, the most important chapter of all, was missing. We are no longer the beginning of the book. We are merely the ones who found the faded, forgotten preface, and the revelation leaves us not with pride, but with a profound and unshakable sense of cosmic vertigo. This new knowledge forces us to redefine the very meaning of life in the cosmos. It is no longer a lightning strike, a one-in-a-trillion accident of chemistry. Instead, it appears to be something more akin to an echo, a persistent resonance that can fade in one place and reappear in another. Our existence is not a miracle, but an inheritance. We are the second bloom in a garden, where the first has long since withered. This realization strips away our species' deep-seated arrogance, our belief in our own exceptionalism, and replaces it with a humbling sense of continuity. We are not a sudden shout in the silence. We are the second, softer note in a song that began long before we had the ears to hear it, a melody of which we may only be a fleeting part. In a strange and beautiful paradox, this discovery makes us feel both less alone and more profoundly lonely than ever before. For millennia, we stared into the void and felt the chill of utter solitude. Now we know we had a neighbor, a sibling, a predecessor. Yet, this companion is separated from us by an impassable gulf of time. We can never speak to them, never know their thoughts, never share in their wisdom or their sorrow. The silence from Mars is no longer the silence of an empty room, but the silence of a room where someone has just left. It is a quiet heavy with memory, haunted by a presence we can feel but never touch, a new and deeper solitude, born from a connection that can never be completed. Our relationship with Mars is forever changed. It ceases to be a mere object of scientific curiosity, a frontier to be conquered and colonized. It becomes a sacred place, a memorial world. Every rover that touches its surface is now an archaeologist in a forgotten holy land. Every drilled core sample is a page from a sacred text. We no longer look at its canyons and craters as mere geology, but as the faded features of an ancestral face. To walk on Mars is no longer an act of exploration, but an act of pilgrimage. We are not visitors to a new world, but children returning to the quiet, dusty home of our most ancient and unknown relative, searching for a family resemblance in the erosion and the rust. This inheritance comes with an immense and unspoken weight. We are the custodians of a legacy we do not understand. Does the crystalline seed contain a warning, a blueprint for a better way of life? Or is it simply a tombstone, a final, silent testament to a life that was lived and lost? This question will haunt our future. Every major decision our species makes, how we treat our planet, how we reach for the stars, how we define our own purpose, will now be viewed through the lens of this Martian precedent. Are we destined to repeat their silent fate? Are we carrying a torch that they passed to us? Or are we simply walking in their footsteps towards the same inevitable cliff? The burden is not in the knowledge we have gained, but in the infinite knowledge we have lost. Our entire perception of time is recalibrated. We have always seen history as a linear progression, a steady march of progress, from a simple beginning towards a complex future. But the Martian story suggests that time, on a cosmic scale, is cyclical. Civilizations may rise and fall like seasons. Our vibrant blue world may simply be enjoying its planetary summer, a fleeting period of warmth and life, just as Mars did billions of years ago. This thought is both terrifying and liberating. It implies that our end is a natural, inevitable part of a larger pattern, just as our beginning was. Our civilization is not the pinnacle of cosmic evolution, but merely one turn of a great wheel that has turned before and will, perhaps, turn again. The Fermi paradox, the great question of where is everybody, is answered in the most melancholy way imaginable. They were here, and they are gone. The great filter, the theoretical barrier that prevents civilizations from becoming interstellar, is not some future test we must pass. It is a past event we have already unknowingly survived by virtue of being second. The silence of the galaxy is not the silence of absence, but the silence of consequence. This knowledge reorients our search for life in the universe. We are no longer looking for pen pals among the stars. We are looking for the ghosts of our older siblings, sifting through the cosmic dust for other, even older legacies, for signs of other Martian springs on worlds impossibly far away. This new origin story will seep into the very soul of our culture. Our art, our music, our literature will become saturated with a sense of Martian melancholy. We will write poems about a sky we have never seen, sing songs of a silence that lasted for 3 billion years, and paint landscapes of a world that was both our cradle and our grave. The story of the lithosentients will become our new, shared mythology, a scientific genesis story that is more profound and more tragic than any we could have ever invented. The human experience will forever be tinged with the beautiful sadness of knowing that the most important part of our story happened without us, and its memory is a gift from the dead. The discovery also marks the beginning of a new age of ignorance. For every answer the crystalline seed provides, it asks 1,000 new questions that can never be answered. What did the world mind of Mars think about? Did it feel joy or fear? What was the nature of its consciousness? What was its final thought as the world faded around it? These are not scientific questions, but philosophical and spiritual ones. The void of this lost knowledge will become a new frontier for human contemplation. We will forever be staring across the solar system at a puzzle whose most important pieces were ground to dust by the relentless passage of time, leaving us to wonder in perpetuity. Yet in this shared mystery, humanity might find a new and lasting unity. The old divisions of nation, race, and creed seem impossibly petty in the face of this cosmic revelation. We are not Americans or Chinese or Russians. We are Earthlings, the second children of the sun, the inheritors of a silent legacy. Our shared ancestry is not in a small valley in Africa, but on an entirely different world. This profound connection could be the catalyst that finally binds us together as a species, united not by a common enemy or a common goal, but by a common and profoundly humbling origin story. We are all the descendants of a ghost, and in that shared haunting, we may finally see ourselves as one family. Consciousness itself is now seen in a new light. It is no longer a random, emergent property of complex matter, but a fragile flame that the universe seems determined to extinguish. The story of Mars is the story of a mind the size of a planet that was snuffed out by the simple, indifferent mechanics of planetary physics. This bestows upon our own consciousness a new and sacred responsibility. We are not just alive. We are the keepers of a flame that has gone out at least once before in our own cosmic neighborhood. Our purpose, then, may not be to conquer or to build, but simply to remember, to understand, and to protect this delicate thinking light against the vast, cold darkness that surrounds it. The structure beneath Hellas Planitia becomes the most significant object in human history. It is our Rosetta Stone, our Dead Sea Scrolls, our Pyramid of Giza, all rolled into one. Deciphering its every secret will become the great work of centuries, perhaps millennia. Its prime number sequence, its isotopic encoding, its very crystalline architecture. Each element is a line in a poem we must learn to read. It will be a source of endless inspiration and debate, a sacred text written not by a god or a prophet, but by a cousin we never knew we had. It is a final message from a lost world, a testament to the idea that even in the face of absolute extinction, a mind can still choose to leave behind a single, beautiful, and eternal thought. The silence of space is forever changed. It is no longer empty. It is filled with absence. When we look up at the night sky, we no longer see a blank canvas of infinite possibility. We see a graveyard, beautiful and serene, filled with the ghosts of worlds that might have been. The darkness between the stars is not a void, but a shroud. We are no longer children looking out of our window with naive wonder at an unknown future. We are adults standing in a quiet cemetery, looking at a family tombstone, and finally understanding the profound, heartbreaking cost of time and the precious, fleeting nature of a single, warm, sunlit afternoon. This realization does not fill us with despair, but with a quiet, contemplative awe. It is a truth that does not shout, but whispers, and in its whisper, it tells us that our lives are infinitely more precious than we ever imagined. We are the beneficiaries of a cosmic tragedy, the living proof that even after the deepest silence, a new song can begin. Our responsibility is to live in a way that honors the memory of the world that came before us, to make our fleeting season in the sun a worthy encore to their long-finished symphony. The knowledge of our past does not dictate our future, but it gives us a reason to make it a future they would have been proud of. And so, we are left in a state of permanent wonder. We look at the red star in our sky, that tiny, faint point of light, and we see not a destination but an origin. It is a constant, silent reminder that our blue world is not a promise but a privilege, a temporary reprieve from the silence that came before and will one day come again. The story of Mars offers no easy answers, no guide to the future. It offers only a single, profound truth. We are not alone in our mortality. We are simply the latest in a long and likely unfinished line of beautiful, thinking beings who are born, who look up at the stars, and who, for a brief and glorious moment, fill the darkness with light. We began with a simple, quiet question. What if we were not the first? Now, that question no longer hangs in the void as mere speculation. It has settled into our bones as a silent, unshakable truth. The silence from Mars is no longer the sound of an empty world, but the sound of a completed story, its final page turned 3 billion years before our own was even written. Our history, which we once believed to be a singular, brilliant monologue, is revealed to be a dialogue with a ghost. We are the answer to a question we never knew was asked, the echo of a voice that has long since faded. Every star in our night sky now looks different, for we know that behind one of them lies not a world of failed potential, but a world of fulfilled and finished purpose. We are no longer the dawn, but the afternoon, living under a sun that has seen a consciousness rise and fall before. This newfound connection to our past leaves us in a state of profound and beautiful contradiction. We are not alone, and yet we have never been more lonely. We have found our cosmic sibling, our predecessor, only to realize they are separated from us by an ocean of time too vast to ever cross. We can listen to the faint echoes of their song, but we can never know the singers. Mars is transformed in our hearts and minds. It is no longer a frontier to be conquered or a resource to be exploited. It has become a sacred ground, a memorial world floating in the velvet dark. To look upon its red face is to look upon the tombstone of our own ancestors, a quiet testament to a life that made our own possible. We are haunted, not by a malevolent spirit, but by the gentle, persistent memory of a family we can never meet. And so we are left as the custodians of a legacy we may never fully comprehend. The great crystalline structure beneath the Martian plains is more than just a message. It is a mirror. In its silent, mathematical perfection, it reflects our own fragile existence. Does it hold a warning about the finite nature of a planetary heart? Or is it a gift, a final act of cosmic generosity, meant to ensure the flame of consciousness was not extinguished forever? We are now bound to this question, destined to live out our own story in the shadow of theirs. Are we merely repeating a cycle, living through our own fleeting planetary summer, destined for the same inevitable autumn? The silence of the lithosentience offers no guidance, only the quiet, heavy responsibility of being the ones who came after, the ones who must now choose what to do with the time we have been given. The silence from the wider universe, once a source of existential dread, now feels different. It is no longer the silence of an empty house, but of a vast and ancient library where countless stories have been written and then turned to dust. The great filter is not a future obstacle, but a past sorrow. The answer to "Where is everybody?" is a heartbreakingly simple one. They were here, and they are gone. Our search for life among the stars is forever changed. We are no longer looking for neighbors to talk to, but for the faint archaeological traces of other cosmic siblings, other first drafts written on worlds that have long since fallen quiet. Our universe is not empty. It is a place of memory, filled with the ghosts of possibilities. And our small blue world is just one of the few candles currently burning against the immense and patient darkness. In the end, we are left not with answers, but with a deeper, more resonant wonder. We look at that small red point of light in our night sky and see the beginning of our own story. We are the inheritors of a cosmic tragedy, the living proof that even after the deepest silence, a new song can begin. What, then, is our purpose? Is it simply to live, to feel, and to burn brightly for our allotted time? Or do we now have a greater responsibility to remember for those who cannot, to carry their forgotten legacy forward into the unknown? The story of Mars offers no final comfort, only the profound and humbling realization that our brief, vibrant existence is a precious, fleeting exception to the quiet rule of the cosmos. How will we choose to spend this one brilliant afternoon, knowing now, with absolute certainty, that the night will eventually fall?